Hello everyone, good evening. Tonight we're going to talk about the quilt assembly PDF. We have all these blocks and so now we got to put them together. I'm going to wait a little bit to get into it until some people jump on. Let me know, say hi so I can see if I can see comments. So say hi if you can see comments so I can see comments. A couple people jumping on. Now there's a little lag when you guys comment from when I see it, so I just want to make sure I can see them before I get too far into the video. So I see a lot of people are already putting their quilts together. They're all looking amazing. I loving all your different layouts and different color combinations. Yay, I can see comments. Hi, Dina. Dina? So I have one of my tops that I'm quilting with you done. The second top is still in progress, and I thought that'd be nice not to complete that one fully, just so I could go over it with you guys tonight. So got my quilt assembly PDF. These instructions, are just a guideline. If you want to do your sashing different, that's cool. If you want to add extra borders, that's cool. Do whatever you want, make your quilt how you want it to be. Yay, Maria, first one you've made it to. Yeah, I know this is probably not a good time for everyone. It's 8:20 in Washington State, so that's the west coast of the United States, and this is a worldwide challenge, and so there's people from Africa and Japan and Europe and Australia, so not everybody's awake right now. So I kind of do it when my kids are asleep, just because the house is nice and quiet and I don't have to worry about them coming and asking me for things. So yeah, I'm excited to see everybody's finished quilts. It's really cool. I know not everybody can finish it in a day or two, so the group is going to stay open. Don't worry about that. I'm not sure when the next challenge is going to start. They said they do want to do more challenges in the future, so stay in the group and then you'll be all ready. They'll announce it in the group and let you know what's going on. This Thursday, everybody will get the next blog post will have the full Snowy Day Quilt Sampler pattern. It'll be the full-length thing, so it'll have your cover photo. It'll have full cutting instructions, because I know everybody was asking for that, so I added that in there. So it has a full list of cutting instructions, everything you need to make the quilt. The coloring page, alternate colors, everything. Angela, I'm not going to lead the next challenge. They'll have a different quilt designer, but maybe I'll quilt along with you guys, I always like to, if it's a block a week, I think I can handle that, and so that'd be fun to quilt with all of you guys, so maybe I'll still be in the group, so we'll see. Ooh, and you're still awake. Good job. I know it's pretty late for you, huh? So, okay, I'm going to start since it looks like a lot of you have jumped on. So, the quilt assembly directions also. So, some people's blocks were ending up a little bit smaller than 16 and a half inches squared. So, when the sashing says to do 2.5 by 16.5 inch strips, of course those strips are going to be too long. If your block is ending up 16 inches, you could just measure your block and say, okay, my block is 16 inches. My strip should be 2.5 by 16 inches. So if you're going for the look that is on the pattern, basically, you will, according to the pattern, you attach them all on the sides. Let's see. Okay. I have this one. It's set up a little differently, okay? So, pretend like this outer border's not on it, I guess. You attach it to your sides. your side strips. And what I like to do when I'm attaching long strips, sometimes I will I line it up, lay it all flat, and lay your strip flat on there. I like to pin just because sometimes long strips can be a little stretchy. They might stretch more than you think, so I like to pin it out just so that it's not stretching when I'm sewing it, and it lines up perfectly, so the strip is the length of the block. You know, and so once I sew these two side strips on, these two ones, I will go and I'll make sure this top line is straight. Like, if a little bit bunches up here, I like mine to be straight. So if it has little bumps, you don't always have to do that. You can just, when you line up your next piece of fabric, you know, just line it up straight and sew. But I like to make them flat, you know, if that makes sense. So according to the instructions, there's just a simple sashing on the sides, and then you do the two long strips. And if you guys have any questions, just shout them out too, okay? As I go along. I'm going to try to go step by step through the instructions. So you have your block. You put your sides. I like to just do, so I lay it out. You don't have to go by my layout. Put your blocks down on the ground. Mix them up. See what looks best to you. Because if you went scrappy, you want to make sure your colors are even. You know, you don't want to have a bunch of dark colors here and then a bunch of light, unless that's what you're going for. You know, make it even in how you want it to be laid out. And then I like to just lay the strips next to them. So, okay, it's easiest for me. I do two strips on the outer ones. Sew that on. And then I go and I basically have the blocks on the ends have the strips. And then I will sew each row together. You know, sew this block to this block, and then this block to this block. And then I'll have 3 strips. And then you go and make your sashing. So your sashing, if you're going with the long strip of sashing and you're going with this size quilt, you should be able to do 6 by 6 2.5 inch strips by width of fabric. And then you take those, I will take 3. So 3 together, and then you can basically cut that down the center, and that will be long enough for two strips, because one strip needs to be 56.5 inches long. And if you do the 2, it's basically 3 strips cut in half are long enough. If, like, my other quilts, I did a different design. I did this design, so my quilt ended up being 68.5 inches wide, because I added an extra border, and I guess I kind of wanted to explain that too, why I did that. I just wanted to give people like a suggestion. If all your blocks aren't all exactly the same size, you could put an extra border around it, and then kind of square up from there. Make sure they're all the same size after you have this extra border on it. I know it makes it a pretty large square, but like say you have one that's 15 inches and all of them are 16 inches, maybe that 15-inch one, give it an extra border. You know, it kind of frames it a little, and it still kind of gives your block that floating look. And then I went ahead and this one I did cornerstones, which I guess maybe I should talk about that. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. Okay, I don't want to get anybody lost here. So the long sashing, basically once I'll start doing with that, and then I'll go with the alternate sashings, okay? So the long sashing, I did post a video that the National Quilters Circle had done before about borders, where they basically took the long, let's see, say this is the width of your quilt. They took the border, which you could do the same thing with the sashing, and line it up down the center on, like, even say this center row of blocks, just to make sure it's long enough. And and then make sure your strip is long enough that way. And then you can go to the edge, and I pin it because that, again, is a long piece of fabric. I'm so close to the camera, so it's hard for me to show. But so what I do since it's such a long piece of fabric, I will kind of pin it directly up against this edge, right? Just flatten it down lightly. Don't stretch it. And I will go to like the center. You could even take your sashing, you know it's the perfect length, fold it in half, and then kind of make a crease in the center. And you could line that crease up. Say this is your center block, line that crease up with this seam that's in the center of your block. So you know that's the center of your sashing, that's the center of your quilt. And then kind of lightly pin outward that way, lightly pin outward that way. You don't want to do a lot of stretching. I know that when I was sewing on my sashing, sometimes it might have been like this block might have looked a little bit longer than the sashing. And what I did was I went around to, on my blocks, you want this to be, on the ends, it's important to be the 4th inch. Sometimes when you're getting on the end of a block, you might make it a little bit smaller. So what before I was squaring up, I went around and I was making sure that these were all 4th inch. Ones that looked a little smaller, I just, popped it on my machine and made sure it was a 4th inch. Some of them weren't. So I tightened those up a little bit, no ripping involved, just to make sure it was all nice and square before I squared it up and cut off things I didn't need to cut off. And then you don't lose your points if you do that. You make sure everything at the ends is 4th inch. And then you add your sashing. So the long strip sashing, center out. Lightly do it so that both ends reach the ends. I know sometimes you might need to do a little bit of stretching. I wouldn't do a ton. Maybe like with this, when I'll go on to the cornerstone one. So if you were to do a basic cornerstone right up against the quilt, you would still do basically the same. Do your side strips. But then you would also, I got the measurements, so if you wanted to do a quilt like this, but you wanted cornerstones, just one sashing with cornerstones, you would need to have 24 16.5-inch strips. Because basically you're going to have a 16.5 strip up here, 16.5-inch strip on the sides, but you only need it on one side. You don't need it on two. So you only will do the strips like so. What I did was basically, let me show you a picture. It's just not big enough, right? Okay, so my cornerstones, basically I sewed my strips onto, let's get closer, boom. My strips onto the sides. And onto the sides of this one, and then onto the side of that one and this one. So basically, the sides were all the same. But then I went around and just the corner blocks, I had strips with cornerstones on them. So really, you only need 8 strips that have cornerstones on it. 8 of those strips will have 2 cornerstones on each side. So you'll do a strip down here with cornerstones on each side, a strip down here with cornerstones on each side, strip right here with cornerstones on each side. Does that make sense? So only 4 blocks really will have the cornerstones, but since they're adjoining, they will all have a cornerstone in between it. It's just, you don't need to do it on every single block, if that makes sense. So yeah, so this one, I went with a double border, that can give you a little bit a bigger quilt, and I just wanted my quilts to all look a little different. Since I'm making 3 quilts, I don't want them all to look the same, so I kind of, did that a little different. Hi, Candy from Wyoming. I'm so glad you've enjoyed it. Oh, you're quilting for the first time on your machine. Yeah. You know, just take it slow. I'll get to that. There's so much information I have to do today. I'm going to try to get it through fast. So yeah, this one I did cornerstones. This one, you know, I just did a basic double sashing. So it's basically, I did a sashing around each of the blocks. And then I did my 4 strips of, you know, the long sashing, which the long sashing had to be longer because my quilt was bigger. And how'd you make that sashing, you ask? I hope the directions were pretty explanatory. Do you ever use border that is wider on the top and bottom than the sides? I've made it 4.5-inch blocks, but it's a little short for a queen size bed. Cindy, I saw some people do some like kind of decorative borders on the top and the bottom. You could do geese on the top and the bottom, or some half square triangles on the top or the bottom. Do a little extra added border, or yeah, you could make it a couple inches longer. With my quilts, I don't tend to do, so, you know, this is my first sampler quilt that I've ever made, and my first sampler quilt I've ever drawn up a pattern for. So I typically don't go with, you know, blocks and sashing and borders, but, this is, you know, there's a first for everything, right? But yeah, you can, you know, do it if you want it to fit your queen size quilt, fit your queen size bed. Yeah, just make your sashing a little bit bigger, or your borders a little bit bigger. I would do it. Okay, so sashing. People are like, can you, you could, if you wanted to sew it this way, just line them up and sew it. All the patterns that I've ever read that had sashing always did it at the diagonal. And so do it the way you're comfortable. Basically, you can either line the corners up identical and then draw your line and sew it. Wrong or right sides facing together, and you want to make sure to sew it the correct way. So sew it this way so that when you unfold it, they're still together. I know there's been times that I sewed it the wrong way. I don't know how I did it, but it was like, oops, I sewed it like that, and but that was when I was starting out. So just make sure you're sewing it the right way so that when the seam is done, it opens up correctly. So like this one, I did a little bit out further just so you could see like where you're supposed to line it up. You could do that if that helps you line it up better. Oh, maybe you can't see. Line it so you can see where it lines up, and then pin it and sew down the line, right? And then once you've done that, I just take my scissors and cut it a 1/4 inch and press it open. So basically this sashing is the same way I make binding. For binding, you do it so there's less bulk, but we will get to that at the end of the video. So if you have any questions about sashing, let me know. I think I've covered sashing. Let me know if there's any questions. So yeah, I did a couple different ways. I like those star sashings that people are doing. That looks really cool. The star cornerstones, and you know, extra borders to make your quilt bigger too. And basically, you attach those the same way you would the long sashing. You know, measure the middle of your quilt, and that's the length it's going to be at the bottom and the top, and the length this way on the sides. Did you square the finished blocks to a certain size? Thank you for asking that, Eddie. All my blocks were about 16.5 inches. If you used a scamp 4.5 inch seam, yours all should have been around 16.5. If you used like your regular presser foot, that is going to be a little bit bigger than a 1/4 inch seam, so that's going to make your squares a little bit smaller. So you want all your squares to be the same size. If all your squares are coming out around 16.5 inches, trim them all down to 16.5 inches. If they're drastically different, I would suggest, you know, where'd that one go? I would suggest like this. Do an extra border around them if they're drastically different. But if they're similar, you know, like check around the edges. Make sure that they're all 1/4 inch. And that could help make ones that seem bigger a little bit smaller. And then ones that are way small, make sure you pressed it very flat. If these seams are bumping up at all, it could make your block seem a lot smaller than it really is. So make sure it's nice and flat before you square it up. Square it up to what most your blocks are. Most your blocks are 16.5, do that. Most your blocks are 16, do that. You want all of them to be the same size because, you know, this is a puzzle and we're putting together a puzzle and all the pieces need to fit correctly. And if you have blocks that are all different sizes, your quilt will not end up square or rectangular. It will end up smaller on top, bigger on the bottom, you know, which if you want it to be that way, hey, cool. If you want it to be square, rectangular, you want everything to be the right sizes and everything. Which way is better to sew? On the diagonal, edge to edge? Are you talking about the sashing, Shannon? I do the diagonal edge to edge. That's what you're talking about. Hello, Meg from Australia. What time is it in Australia right now? Yes, so that's the problem. People are having problems with putting together the blocks because they're not all the same size. You want them to all be the same size. Where's the video? I can't find it. Shani, you might want to refresh the video. Could somebody type a message to Shani saying she needs to refresh the video? Because I can't really type a message right now. Do you use spray starch when pressing your blocks before squaring them up? Candy, no, I don't. I've never used starch. I know a lot of people love starch. So if that's something that you like to use, go for it. I just have never used starch. I don't know why. I haven't tried it. Yes, the sashing. I like to do diagonal to diagonal. Some people, you know, just square edge to edge, you know. I don't know why they do that. Maybe, I know for binding, you do it because there's less bulk. You distribute the bulk. Whoa, so it's 1:45 p.m., so it's on the middle of the day. So some people are probably working and stuff, huh? What is the best way to square a 16.5 inch block? I can square the half square triangles pretty easily, but unsure how to... Okay, Marjorie, some people have bought a 16.5 inch ruler. I haven't. So what I did was I used my mat. Also, since I knew that, I don't know if this is like the correct way, but I measured, and these were exactly 4 inches. So I ran around the edges of my block, like I lined my large ruler up with this block. And since the center ones are 4 and they equal 8, these edge ones should equal 4 1/4. So I ran around with this, measuring up 4 1/4 inches out, and that's where I trimmed it off. And I really only had to trim off tiny bits on my little edges. You shouldn't have to trim up too much. If you are, it might be because, you know, you need to sew in some of your seams a little bit more. Maybe they got a little smaller than a 1/4 inch when you went to the edge of your block. Oh, Pamela, you're in Australia too. Cool. I don't know if I've ever gotten Australia people actually when I was live. I'm not sure. I don't know. Have you guys been on my live videos before? I think so. Okay, so squaring up blocks. Make sure they're all square and all the same size. If you need to use sashing around them to do that, do that. Because, you know, you want it all to fit together like a puzzle. So once you've gotten those square, you add your sashing to the sides. make them into rows is easiest. Add your row sashing, and then sew 2 rows together and sew the 3rd row on. I like to press toward the sashing because then it's less bulk. And usually, like, some of these sashings were darker, so it didn't matter. Some of the lighter ones are okay, too. You just want to make sure if you have any, like, say you got a lot of strings hanging out and you're pressing toward the white, you want to try to go through all your blocks and trim up those, because once you're quilting it, you don't want to have, like, I don't know if you can see that, like black threads going through your white fabric, which is kind of a pain, and you don't want that to happen. Okay, so, I don't know, let's see. What's this question? How do you make sure the sashing is straight before sewing it together? And I seem to have cut smaller blocks, so Shani, like what I was saying, maybe you should, if some of your squares are way smaller than others, maybe put a border around those blocks, and, you know, say that's part of the design. You could do a border that's the same color inside your block, or you could choose a different color of border, like this one, since this one has 2 sashings, you know. Say some are 15, add a border that will make it equal to the other ones. So if you have a 15-inch block and all the other ones are 16, you'll want it to be half-inch borders plus a 1/4 inch, so that would be 3 and 3 1/4 inch border all the way around, or you could do 1 inch and then square that up to the rest of them. That way they're all the same, and then do your sashing after that. So any more questions on sashing? So basically, to get your top together, some people aren't even using sashing, which looks really cool too. I saw that. If all your blocks are the same size, you can do that. You could even, you know, once you get, I guess what I should say now. Okay, so now you got your strip, and you have 3 strips. You wanna, what I do is I pin so let's see. So I go, these are my 2 different quilts, so pretend like this has a 3rd one on it. I take the center blocks and I line those center blocks up like this and fold my fabric down so that my blocks are lined up. And I'll pin from that center block out when I'm sewing the 3 strips together. That way your blocks are lined up. If you just start, say, okay, I got my 3 blocks and I'm going to start sewing them together. I'm going to start from here and just start pinning this way. 1, the fabric can stretch, and then your blocks won't be lined up. 2, if this one just happens to be a tiny bit longer than this one, they're not going to line up. So what I do is I line the actual block up like this, and make sure it's lined up, and then flatten this fabric down, and then I start pinning. If you have cornerstones, you know, nest your seams and pin out from the cornerstones. That kind of makes, cornerstones kind of make it easy that way. That way you can nest it, and you know for sure this is going to be 16.5-inch strip. This is a 16.5-inch strip. Pin at the cornerstones, and then kind of flatten your fabric out, and then start pinning. Hi, Andrea. You didn't know I was on? I'm sorry. I wish they would give notifications to everyone in the group. That would make it easier for everyone to find me. I'm going to see if I can put this as the pin post. Do you think that's a good idea for people for tomorrow? Maybe I should try to put this as a pin post. So yeah, so once you got all your 3 strips sewed together, you have a top. Yay! Your top is complete. And now comes the daunting part of basting your quilt. Basting my quilt is my least favorite part of quilting. You know, once I get my quilt top done, I'm usually like, ooh, I want to cut into new fabric again. But, you know, a finished quilt is a lot warmer than a quilt top. So, you know, it's good to finish those quilts, and then, you know, you can share them with your friends, give them to people as gifts, and, you know, it's a lot funner to look at when it's actually finished. So, we got our top done. Trying to think of it. If there's any other questions about the top, the sashing, cornerstones. If you're doing cornerstones with the simple 1-block sashing, you'll need 16 cornerstones that are 2.5 inches squared, and you'll need 24 16.5-inch strips if you just want to do the basic 1 sashing around the blocks and the cornerstones. You'll need the same amount, but the lengths will be different if you want to do the double border. The double border, I had 18 of the 16.5-inch white strips. I had 18 of the 20.5-inch strips for the tops. And then I went with my sashing of 24 20.5-inch strips and 16 of the 2.5-inch squares. So I don't know, maybe I'll put that info in the description if anybody is interested in doing a double sashing with cornerstones and strips. Okay, so we got our quilt top done. Yay! Now how do we put the 3 layers together? I know it's like, oh, this is the scary part for some people. I know the first quilt top that I did that I wanted to quilt, not tied. My first quilt was tied with yarn, and my second quilt I wanted to do on the machine. I wanted to quilt on my machine. It took me a while. I had the top done for a while, and then finally my sister came over and she helped me because she had taken a quilting class in high school. And so she knew what to do. First, I don't have a big enough backing piece. What should you do? So, it is best... I could quilt together. So, it's best to use a high-quality cotton fabric for your backing. You can get extra wide backing fabric. It ranges from like 56, I think, inches to 108 inches, because typically 108 inches wide would be a king-size quilt. So you could get wide backing. I've never done that. It would be cool. I don't do it because it's more expensive per yard, but you know, you're getting that extra width, so that's why it's more expensive per yard. I know Fabric.com has a lot of selection. There's some at Joann Fabrics. They have a 108-inch wide backing fabric. Also, you could piece your backing. I know a lot of quilters don't use sheets. Oh, Mary, there is larger than 108. Oh, is it 119? Goes to 119 or 120? Maybe that's what it was. There's a section on Fabric.com that says 108 to 120. Maybe that's what it is. So if you have a king size, you probably need the 120 width. Yeah, 120. Okay, so that's what it is. I've never used it. I've never made a king size quilt yet. I'm hoping to do that someday. We have a king size bed. But a lot of quilters don't like sheets. I know some people like to use vintage sheets for backing. Some people like to go buy a cheap sheet for backing. I've used some sheets sometimes just because my Joann Fabrics are both 30 minutes one way, 30 minutes another way, and Target's like 5 minutes from my house. So I went to Target and got it's 300 count sheet, ultra soft threshold sheet, and that has worked nicely for me. If you use a higher count sheet, it'll be hard to quilt because there's more threads in that fabric, so it's going to be harder for your needle to push through that fabric. A lot of people had mentioned if you're hand quilting, a thicker, the 600 count is going to be really hard to hand quilt, so you're not going to want to do that. So if you're wanting to use a sheet, I would go with a 200 to 300 thread count. I like the way that I'm not sponsored by Target. Not sponsored, but I like the way that one works with my quilts. I've used it on a couple backings, and I don't tend to do that. If I'm in a pinch and I'm like, I don't want to wait a week for fabric to get here, and I don't want to drive a half hour, I'm just going to run to Target and grab a sheet because I want it. And I know those sheets last a long time, and they're nice and soft for a back of a quilt. You also could use flannel for a back of a quilt. You could also use minky. You could also use fleece. It's all a personal preference, I believe. There's no right or wrong way to do your art. I know it used to be really taboo to mix different fabrics in a quilt, which I still have not done that, mixing fabrics. I know some people I've seen on Instagram quilters have mixed fabrics, and it comes out nice. You probably want to quilt it a lot just so that those fabrics don't come apart, because they're going to shrink differently. If you have a polyester and you have a cotton, they're going to shrink differently because polyester doesn't shrink as much as a cotton. Anyways, so I was into backing fabric, sorry. So I'm going to kind of just show an example. How to piece your backing. You could just piece it with, hey, I've got a bunch of scraps from the front of my quilt, and I just want to piece it with that. And that's, a modern thing to do, is just take your scraps and piece it for the back. What you could do is lay your top out on the ground and kind of get those big pieces that you have and lay it on top of your quilt top. You want it to be a couple inches wider on each side. So I like to say 4 inches wider than your whole width, 4 inches wider than your length, 4 inches longer, 4 inches wider. So you have that gap for when you quilt. Sometimes fabric goes out a little further than you're going to expect it to, and you don't want to cut your backing right up to the side of your quilt and then quilt it, and oh no, my front fabric is actually bigger than I thought it was. So piecing your back, you could do it that way. I've done it the way of basically you get 3.5, say, so if you're doing the smaller quilt, that's going to be 3.5 yards. Let's pretend this is 3.5 yards of fabric. So I have 3.5 yards of fabric. First, I'm going to iron all that fabric. If I bought that fabric online, it's going to come and it's going to be all folded, and it's going to have wrinkles, and it's going to have creases. And when I lay that fabric on the ground to quilt it, I want it to be nice and flat, nice and crisp. So I iron all that fabric. And then you take that fabric, say it's 3.5 yards. How did I get that amount? Basically, you take the width of your quilt, add 4 inches. So that would be the width you want your backing to be, right? Then you take that and times it by 2. So the width times 2. That came out, I had it written down. Say, let's see, I think it's on here, huh? No. So, 172? Anyway, 63 plus 63 is 126. Anyway, so say this is 126 inches. That's basically 2 widths of your quilt. What you want to do is you could just, say you have longer than you need. take it, lay it out on the ground, put your quilt top on top of it, and make sure there's enough on the edges, and then you cut it. Basically, if it's the right amount, you'd be cutting it in half. So now you have 2 pieces of fabric that are the same width and same length. You will go ahead and cut this selvage off, because selvage is a lot tighter than the rest of your fabric, and you don't want that on your backing. So you'll cut the selvage off. And then you'll go and you'll take this rectangle that we cut in half. See? Well, 2 rectangles. We'll cut that in half, and we'll take this rectangle, put it down here, and we'll sew them together. So that'll make a lot longer, you know. So we got the 2 rectangles. This is our long piece of fabric. We cut it down the center. Now we have 2 rectangles. We cut our selvage off because we don't want the selvage in our quilt. And we'll sew those 2 pieces together. So now we have a 63-inch wide piece of fabric, and we have an 83.5-inch piece of fabric. Because basically without the selvage, these are both going to be 42 inches minus a ½ inch for your seam. Oh, so most people do 10 inches extra. I don't like to waste that much fabric, so I only do 4. So if you're more comfortable with doing more around your quilt, go for that. I don't know why you'd have to worry about shrinkage until it's washed, but yeah, just because, you know, if you're worried about, I guess with polyester batting, it does seem to stretch out more than you thought it was going to. When I used to use polyester batting, I'd have that problem with quilting, and I'm like, ooh, I'm glad my backing was a lot bigger than I anticipated. With cotton batting, it doesn't seem to stretch out as far as when I used to use polyester batting. So if you're more comfortable with adding 10 inches, add 10 inches to that. The fabric requirements did say 3 3/4, so if you got that amount, that should be good for the basic amount. If you decide to make your quilt longer or wider, you're going to need more backing fabric. Take your amount, add to it, you know, and figure out your dimensions. This just gives your backing one seam, and the more seams, you know, when there's a seam, that's a weak point in your quilt. So that's why it's nice to get the extra wide backing, then you have no weak points. If you can give dimensions on sashing again, it would be great. I just got on. Dawn, if you got the quilting PDF, it's going to tell you all the dimensions on sashing that you need. You know, the 2.5 inch by 16.5 inch strips. And then I think for my one with the cornerstones, I'll put that in the comments. It was basically, you need 16 squares of 2.5 inch strips. And then if you're doing just a basic one sashing with the cornerstones, you need 24 16.5 inch strips. 2.5 by 16.5 inch strips. But I'll put that in the comments, how I did mine with the double border. I'll do that. When there's quilting, it shrinks, yeah. Okay, so when you're doing your backing, you want it to be bigger than your quilt top. If you don't, you will be sad. You know, that happened to me once, and then I had to, like, kind of patch the backing and make it a little bit bigger, because it wasn't big enough. Well, Shani, all cotton is going to shrink, which that's okay. If you didn't wash your backing fabric, if you didn't wash your top fabric, don't wash your backing fabric. You want it to be the same. If you washed your front fabric, wash your backing fabric, because you want it to shrink at the same rate. Cotton batting shrinks. It shrinks 3%, which is fine. It gives it a nice crinkly texture, see? This wasn't washed like super recently, but the quilting, you know, because right after it is quilted, it's a lot flatter. And then when you wash it, it shrinks up that 3%. So your quilt's going to shrink up a couple inches if you use cotton. It probably won't shrink as much as if you use polyester batting. Have you ever made a quilt by using a old blanket for the batting instead of... No, I haven't, Cecilia. I'm sure you could do that. I would just, you know, be worried that it might wear out faster than the top of your quilt, because your top of your quilt is nice new fabric, and it's going to shrink at a different rate than a blanket that's been washed several times. That's another reason why you don't want to really sew old fabric that's been washed and washed to new fabric. You'd want to, like, say you have an old blanket that needs to be repaired, you'd want to wash your repair fabric so that, at least a couple times, so that it shrinks enough and it's same, you know. How do you attach the sashing properly, Shani? I'll use a smaller chunk. Well, I pin it in place. Some people don't pin. Pinning in place helps me make sure that it's on there correctly. I pin it to one side, sew it, and then, you know, I make sure it's all level and sew the top sashing on. And then when you got that big long piece, fold it in half, make a crease, and put it in the center block so that you're pinning from the center out, nice and soft. Don't stretch your fabric. Hope that helps you, Shani. I don't know what else. You just want to sew it straight and don't stretch your fabric that much. Oh, so Karen says that one of her teachers says that wide backing, she likes to use wide backing that has a lot of flowers and distraction on it so you don't see errors. I bought a sheet, which I kind of regret because I didn't press it enough. And so, let me see if I can find it. The backing, if you do not get your backing completely flat, you might get little pinches in it, like, I don't know if you can see that. See that little pinch? And so if your backing fabric was all flowery, you probably wouldn't see that little pinch that much. See? It got pinched. And that's because I was impatient and I didn't press my backing enough. It was a sheet that I'd never used before. It was this vintage looking sheet at Target, and I wanted it because it was this pretty pink. And so I got some little pinches. I didn't go through and seam rip my quilting out because of these little pinches, just because they're so small that once this is washed and dried, it's going to all shrink up and it's going to get crinkly, and you're not going to notice those little pinches. But I'm not going to buy that sheet again because it involves too much steaming, too much pressing. And that's another reason why it's good to use quilting cotton. Cotton is going to react the same way the front of your quilt is. So, yeah, so piece that back together if you don't have a large enough piece, or you can buy extra wide backing fabric. I basically did my sashing pieces, I cut them salvage to salvage strips, basically, like I would do my sashing, and then attach them on a diagonal, so it doesn't really stretch that much. I guess these don't stretch either way. I don't know. It stretches a little bit, but it's not that bad. That's why I pin it a lot, because if you pin it a lot, it's not going to go anywhere. If you didn't pin it, it might stretch more than you wanted it to. Then when you sew it all the way to the other end, there's like a little bit left over on this side, and you're like, what? So I would pin it. So that would be cross grain. Cross grain. So, Connie and Mary and everyone else in the group, yeah, I'm a self-taught quilter, so I don't know some of these terms. I'm sorry. I'm not an expert at all. I like to make patterns, and I like to sew, and I like to quilt, and so I like that there's a lot more experienced people in the group that can help out, like Mary. So yeah, so it is on the cross grain, but as long as you pin, it'll stay in place, and go slowly. Don't stretch your fabric. Sashing is 2.5 inches wide by the width of the fabric, yes. But then I basically sewed it to other ones. So, like, one width of fabric isn't going to be big enough for your sashing. So I sewed 3 together, and basically if you cut that in half, that's pretty close to 56.5 inches. But I wanted it to be exact, so I measured it up to my quilt, cut it before I actually sewed it onto my quilt, because I didn't want it to have a little, be stretched at all. Do you have hand quilt? Have I ever hand quilted, Linda? No, I have not hand quilted before. Is that what you're asking? No, I have not. I just machine quilt. I've hand tied before, but that was a long time ago when I was like 12. Okay, so we got lots. It's already 9:14. Okay, so we have our backing fabric. We have our batting. So if you want to use batting, some people aren't using batting because they want to light quilt. So you got your backing, you have your batting, you have your top. Your batting, you can use polyester, you can use wool, you can use cotton, whatever you prefer. I like cotton. I like warm and natural cotton. I like warm and white cotton. I like warm and plush cotton. I just like cotton. I like the way it feels. I like the texture it gives. I like the crinkliness it gives when you wash it. I like to say, ooh, my quilt's 100% cotton. Fancy. Seeing a lot of questions about the group closing or staying open so we groupies that fell behind can still finish. Will you be staying open, and will there be doing this again? It was awesome. Sherry, yes, the group will be staying open. Thursday, you will actually get the full-length pattern. So if you're behind it all, you can just save the full-length pattern, and you'll have it all there in your little hands. So that'll be good. And then, yes, they'll be having another challenge. They just have not announced the date yet. Thank you, Debbie. She said that I'm answering the questions in detail. Sometimes I'm worried that I'm rambling, but I want to make sure everybody is on the same page and that everybody understands it, because I know there are a lot of first-time quilters in the group. I know there's experienced ones out there, too, which I'm very thankful for you guys helping out all those new quilters, because I'm not on my phone 24 hours a day, and also, you know, I'm not an expert. I'm not going to say I'm an expert. I'm sure there's better ways to do things that I do it. I do it the way that I like to do it, and that is good for me. So if you have a way that you prefer, do it your way. If you look on Pinterest and find better ways, do it that way. You know, I love all of you, okay? So, let's see. What were we? So we have all 3 layers. What you want to do now is you want to find a flat surface. Some people that can't get on their knees like to put their quilts on their tabletop and clamp it to the side so it's nice and taut. You can take your batting, lay it on a ground, and what I do is I take my painter's tape and I tape it flat, nice and taut to my ground. I do it on my tile in my kitchen, and that way when I go to baste it and use spray baste, I can mop it up easily when I'm done, either with a soapy washcloth or with my mop. I know some people with allergies, they can't use the spray-based. Spray-based is nice. The only problem same with this quilt that I did, I was running low on my spray-based, so I did not spray-baste it enough. So I think that might be also why I had a little bit of pinching issues on my back. Spray thoroughly. If you don't want to use spray-based, some people use straight pins with the little pin mores. When I was younger and I just used straight pins with no pin mores, I scraped up my arms really, really bad. So don't do that. Don't do that. We don't want to have scratched up arms. If you have pin mores, you can use those. If you don't have pin mores, another option is curved basting needles, which I bought extra because I went to do a throw size quilt and I didn't have enough. So basically it's curved so that when you baste it, these two parts stick up higher and this is down lower. And I would recommend like 3 to 4 inches apart. And a good way to measure that is basically like this much of your hand, a pin there, because you don't want your fabric shifting at all when you're quilting it. So we got our 3 layers. We laid down our backing fabric nice and tight. You don't want to stretch it. You just want it nice and flat, no wrinkles in it. Iron it if you need to, nice and flat. Then you go and you take your batting. You lay your batting on top of that and you smooth it out so there's no wrinkles. You don't want to pull on your batting either. Same with polyester, just nice and flat. No, you don't want to pull. The one thing about polyester, I do know, since if you get like a high loft polyester, it does squish down and shift out a little. So once you put that top layer on, you want to make sure to press down and start pinning from your center out. Don't start pinning on an edge. You might start pinning and then, oh, I didn't have enough extra on the side. That's why I like to pin from the center out. Same with my spray basting. I like to take basically, so this is my backing and I have my batting on it. I put my quilt top on it. I will fold back half of my quilt top. Oh, well, first I'll do my batting. I'll fold back half of the quilt batting, spray my quilt batting, and then I'll go like this, kind of like you're swimming, and kind of press it out. Just lightly flatten it. And then I'll spray more and then lightly flatten it out from the center of your quilt out. And then I go to the other side and fold that up. Spray, swim, basically. And then once I put my quilt top on, I'll do the same thing. I'll fold half it up, spray the batting, and then when you're spray basting with your quilt top, you want to make sure those lines are nice and straight on your quilt when you're spray basting it down. Same with pins. You lay your quilt top nice and flat and make sure your lines are nice and straight. Because you could lay it down weird and it'd be kind of crooked. Then when you go to quilt it, it's going to be all crooked. So you want those lines to be nice and perpendicular, nice and straight. Mary, so straight grain would be salvage to salvage. Did I say that correctly? Is that the way? That's how I've always put it together. Straight grain with that salvage to salvage. Is that correct? Please tell me, Mary. If machine quilting, do you use what needle size to go through the layers? What I use is basically it's like medium weight to heavyweight needle, universal needle on my machine. Oh, what size is it? Is it like 90 or 100? Somebody know the size that they typically use? Connie is asking. You can even reply to Connie's comment. Basically, I use the medium to heavyweight needle. So Kathy says she tapes hers down to the table. Yes, so like if I was taking my salvages and sewing my salvage edges together, that would be straight grain, correct, Mary? Because this is my salvage. If I was taking two salvages and sewing them together, that would be straight grain, right? Because that's not stretchy. But this way is stretchy. Ah, good. So I did the directions correct. Yay! Yeah, most of my like knowledge is from Pinterest and Instagram and just like kind of researching online. So I've learned my methods from just how other people have done it, and so that's how I've seen other people do their backing, the salvage to the salvage. So I'm glad I did that right. I mean sewing based as well as pin. Are you saying that you use curved safety pins? You are supposed to still baste in addition to pinning? Dawn, using the curved pins is basically basting. You don't have to sew baste. You can if you want. I know some people like to sew baste instead of pinning and basting. I know some long arm people, you can bring your quilt to a long armor and have them sew baste it for you. I called my local one and they don't do it there. But, you know, you could call your local long arm and see if they sew baste, and that would be really cool if they could just do it for you, right? Because I hate basting. I hate it. Sorry. Can you use a Q-snap? What is a Q-snap? I know that there's also basting guns that, like, have these little plastic things that you can shoot in and baste it with a gun. She's talking about baste with thread as well as pins. Do people typically baste with pins and thread, Mary? I usually just baste with pins or baste with spray baste. I've never done this basting with thread. You probably could do both. It would make your quilt more secure. You could do the spray and the pins. The more, the less shifting, right? You want those 3 layers to be secure and nice and flat and all good together. So Mary says, yeah, people used to do both the thread basting and the pin basting. Very time consuming. Yeah, that's one reason why I like to use, I go for the spray over the pins, just because it's a lot faster, and I'm not in very good shape. It's just doing this is kind of a workout sometimes, and pin basting on your hands and knees and doing all the pins, it takes a long time. So I don't do both. As long as you do them close enough together, you should be okay. And also, so say once you got your back, you've basted your quilt. Now it's time to quilt your quilt. If you are doing quilting block by block, it is best to start from the center block, quilt that, and then quilt outward. That way, anything that's going to shift at all, you know, you got your center done. Anything that's going to press outward is going to be center out, and everything will still be lined up, and everything will be lined up, and it won't be like askewed, like if you started in the corner. That's at least how I learned to do from the center out. Yeah, I don't know what a Q-snap is either, Marjorie. What's a Q-snap? So quilting, center out. Some people I was gonna try to like give you a few different examples of quilting, but you know, I didn't have enough time, and I didn't even finish my second quilt top. I just didn't have enough time. So, oh really, Dawn, your ears gummed up. I use this June Taylor ink from, I got it at Joann Fabrics. It doesn't really seem to gum it up. Someone on another video, Romelia, she said that, I think it was Romelia. Somebody said on the last video that they let their spray base dry, like they spray their quilt and then like the next day they quilt it. If you quilt it right away, the the stuff is going to be nice and gooey still, and it might gum up your needle. I've never really had a problem with it like super gummy. It's just like sometimes there might be a little ball of like fuzz at the top of my needle, but I have a heavy duty machine. Mine is a Janome heavy duty 1000, so it's meant to be heavy duty. So maybe that's why I don't have a problem with it too. It's meant to go through layers. It's meant to, chug on. So maybe that's why. Maybe do like a test sample, like a little placemat with the spray base. Let it dry overnight and quilt it and see how you like it. Just because it does save a lot of time, but a lot of people have allergies and can't use it. So we got all of our layers basted. We have this quilt. We need to quilt it. For beginners, I know this is the scary step, quilting on your machine. I would say go with something basic. If you have a walking foot that came with your machine, awesome. Walking feet make it way easier. If you don't, I think it's a very good investment. You can go to your local sewing machine store. They might have one in stock. They might be able to order one. I know Joann Fabrics carries like Viking, maybe Singer too. But what's nice about it is, see, it has these little teeth on top. So it's pulling your fabric from the top and bottom through your machine at the same time, or that way. And so it's like, it's kind of helping you, helping you along. And there's less bunching, I noticed, on my back when I use my walking foot. Back when I used to just use my basic presser foot, which you can totally quilt with your presser foot, it didn't go through as smoothly. I would not recommend using spray based on carpet just because you do tend to overspray your fabric. So the spray does end up landing on the floor next to it. So then your carpet would be all sticky unless you have like a shampooer, or some people take like painter's plastic, lay that down on their carpet first and then tape to that. I can use a can of spray base for actually a couple quilts. Trying to think, at least like 3 baby quilts at least. I can't remember how many I did with my other one. I was running low on this last one, and I don't think I sprayed it enough. Also, my window was open, so the breeze kept coming and blowing it, and I think it was drying the spray base before I could lay it down. So it wasn't very sticky. But usually this is way sticky enough, and I usually only have to, one can will do a couple quilts, at least 2 quilts. How many cans of spray base do you... Oh my goodness, what is that? Something on the bottom of that. Don't want to get that on me. Something from Joann's is all sparkly on the bottom of my hand. Sorry. Okay. Back to it. So we got now we're quilting. I don't know, like Joann's has something, I just bought this, and like there's glittery stuff on the bottom of that can. I don't want to get that on my quilt. Sorry, I got a little distracted. So for beginners, I would go with something simple. If you want to do a block by block, a really simple way to quilt it would be just to basically go, say, these are all squares. You could either go on the outside of your design, just line your foot up against your designs. Look at your batting. Your batting will tell you how far apart your quilting can be. Some say 6 inches, some say 4 inches, some say 10, some say 12. I think mine is like 10, but I like to do a smaller, like 1-inch lines takes a lot longer. If you're new, it might be stressful. This took me 3 nights, and I think each night was like an hour and a half, because I had interruptions with my kids. I had to do some seam ripping because the back got bunched a little, and I don't like that, so I seam ripped a little. So it took me 3 nights. But you know, you could even say, okay, I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch on this seam, a 1/4 inch on this seam, 1/4 inch from both seams, which would be really easy because you just line your foot up. Mine's a little bit more than a 1/4, you know, line your foot up and just do around each line. You could even do that as straight line quilting the whole quilt, just a 1/4 inch. You could do 1/4 inch from each seam, then a 1/4 inch this way from each seam, you know, kind of give it a grid look. You could do like I did on this one. Basically, I started with one of my center sashings. So I like to call mine organic straight line quilting because mine's not super straight. There are people that go and they take the ruler with the painter's tape to make their lines so your lines can be perfect. I'm not perfect. My lines aren't perfect. My lines are straight-ish. So I'm happy with how they look, and that's all that really matters, if you're happy with how it looks. So what I did was I started on one of my center, I think it was actually this one. Started on my center sashing because it is a long strip all the way across my quilt. I started on one side and I lined this up, my foot on that line. So it's basically a 1/4 inch in. And then from there, I set this to 1 inch and I did 1 inch strips. Once I got to another intersection that was pretty close to my foot, or it was on my foot, I kind of straightened up the line again using my lines as guides. My lines aren't completely perfect because they're sewn together blocks that aren't completely perfect. So my lines aren't perfectly straight, but they're lines and I like them. Once it gets nice and crinkly, you can't tell as much that they're not perfectly perfect. Can you demonstrate on your original quilt the order of your sewing the quilting lines? So yeah, the original quilt, I basically did the same with this one as I did with the original one. I basically take my quilt. Oh, I'm not on the camera. I take my quilt and I roll it up. I forgot I was gonna put my machine out here. So I roll the quilt up, probably the other way, not this way. I roll it toward it, but pretend it's the other way. I'm trying to find where I started. So I roll it up so that there's about 1/3 of my quilt left. And then I started on this line. See how it's a 1/4 inch from there? I started on my edge and I lined this foot up on my edge of my quilt. And I went from one side of my quilt all the way to the other side of my quilt. See? And then I went from there and measured this to 1 inch. And then I went over and did all the way to the end. And then once you go to the end, you can roll this up and start going the other way. Every time I encountered, say, this line is pretty close. I think that might even be, It was close. Every time I encountered a line that was a little bit closer, I would adjust this so that it was like on one of these lines. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? Basically, you can use tape to make your lines, guidelines, and put your guide up against the tape, or put your foot up against the tape, just so you get it kind of straight. You could also put tape diagonally on your quilt and just do a bunch of diagonal lines, line it up. Does that make sense, Connie? You quilt from the center out. Most people, yes, people quilt from the center out. If you're doing a block by block, start with the center, quilt out. Start with the center, quilt out. When I'm doing straight line, I don't start from the center out. I start from one side to the other. I don't have a problem with it. If it's nice and flat and it's basted well, it doesn't shift at all. I don't know if it's because it's a spray base and I typically will overspray, and so it's like glued together and it doesn't go at all. This one had like, I don't think it had any bunching. If it had any bunching on the back, I didn't notice it at all. It's all nice and crinkly from being cotton and washed and dried. But yes, you want to quilt from center out, typically. I don't think other people that do straight line quilting, I don't think they do center out. One reason I don't is because I don't like to bury my threads. I like to bury threads because I don't want to see them, which is basically, if you're quilting in the center and you have your starting threads are hanging there, and then when you're done, you have your ending threads and they're hanging there. You don't want to snip those off and you have little threads hanging there. You want to keep long beginners and ends, and you take your needle and you actually put those little threads onto your needle. You'll make a knot that's very close to your fabric. Like, take it and then say this is the thread. Take it and you like wrap it around a couple times, go through to make a knot, and then you'll take your needle and go in the middle of the layers and pull that through and pop that little knot in. I would recommend Googling burying, B-U-R-Y, threads, burying threads quilting. There's a lot of good YouTube videos on it if you need a little more explanation on that, because you don't, like, you could just secure back and forth and leave it a little hanging, but that doesn't look as nice as if you were to take those threads and actually sew them into your quilt. Did you use a different color thread for your bobbin? No, I did not. Since both the front and the back are pretty light, you could go and match your bobbin up to the backing fabric. You can match the bobbin up to and the top thread up to your top fabric. I just went with white. The gray thread I have is a little too dark for this, so I went with white, which I don't know if you can see. You probably can. And I have so much white in these that I kind of like seeing the quilting. If you don't like seeing the quilting, this isn't going to be for you. Straight line quilting with one color thread isn't going to be for you. Go with the quilting that you're going to like. Most people will go with basically the lightest color in your quilt. So the lightest color in this quilt was actually a light gray, but I didn't have a light gray, and Joanne's didn't have one that I wanted, so I just went with white. A lot of times people will go with a neutral, like a cream, or a light gray. I use a different color of thread on my back if I want to make my quilt stand out. Yeah, you can do that too, or you could use Tina said that. She used a different color on the back. Like, if you have, like, some people that do long arm, or you can even do decorative stitches on your regular quilt. You could use a variegated thread that's, different colors. You could use a bright pink. You could use whatever color you want. This is your quilt. This is your artwork. Make it how you want it to look. If other people don't like it, it's not their quilt. Sorry to be mean, but It's your quilt. Make it how you want it to be. You know, how you're going to be happy with it. You don't want to finish it and then be like disappointed you didn't do it a different way. Make it how you want it to, you know, look. So, you know, with the quilting, for beginners, maybe Google beginner quilting. I know when I started out, all I did was stitch in the ditch, which basically is you sew right on this seam. So right on this seam is stitching in the ditch. It's basically the ditch of your piecing. You could also just stitch in the ditch of each square, basically making a grid. Or, like I said, you could do a 1/4 inch from each seam, making a grid, starting with the center block, going out. If you're doing straight line quilting, you could start from the center out also if you're doing a grid, and make sure to sew the long threads into your quilt. You don't want to leave them hanging. All right, so if there's any more questions on quilting, let me know. I've never tried free motion quilting. I just bought a foot, so I'm kind of excited to try that. But I'm going to try that on some placemats before I try it on a large quilt, just because with quilting, you need to master your speed. That's one problem that I used to have, still sometimes. You need to, you know, speed of your fabric going through, speed of your pedal pressure. It's, you know, all needs to be nice and smooth. If you go really fast and your fabric's not going through at the same time, you might get too small of stitches or too large of stitches. And to have even stitches, you know, you want it to be going through constantly at the same speed, if that makes sense. I know I saw a lot of people in the group were doing quilt as you go, which is basically you have a square of backing fabric, a square of batting, and then you have your quilt block, and you just quilt that one block. I've never done quilt as you go. It seems very cool. And then basically once those blocks are quilted, I'm not sure how you would join them. I'm assuming you leave a little bit of the batting so you can secure the battings together, and then you secure both of those together with the sashing. Thank you for your video. It's almost midnight here. Sorry, I'm trying to make this fast, Marjorie. Yeah, it's probably getting late. It's already 9:44 here. Okay, so we got it all quilted. Now we need to put binding on it, which I wanted to show you guys this. So basically, the binding, you create your binding the same way you would do your sashing, okay? Let's see. So I got my binding here. Boom, 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 boom. So we attached that binding like our sashing. We took, for if you use the dimensions that are required for the quilt, you'll have 7 strips of sashing. Mine's a little bit bigger. My quilt's 68.5 inches, so I did 8 strips of sashing. It's a little bit, it's more than I need, but I didn't want to be a little short. So you do them on the diagonal, you trim it off, and then you iron those down. And then once those are ironed down, you'll go through and you'll fold your sashing in half. You'll iron the whole thing in half. With one of the method of binding in my instructions, if you have a different method that you prefer, go with that. This was the easiest to explain. This was the easiest when I was starting out, how I binded my quilts. So I basically folded this in, and then I ironed the rest. And so this is going to be my starting point of my binding. So when you start your binding, I like to start at on the bottom of my quilt in the center. So I left this a little longer than I typically would for this binding method, just because I wanted to show you the other binding method as well, if I can. So like I would typically start about here. If you're doing the folded method, you could also even just start, so just this back stitch and then like cut it off, and then start sewing your binding on. So this binding's all sewn on, okay? Edge to edge, all the way around my quilt. So then what do I do when I get to a corner? I want a nice mintered corner. Hi Dana, hi Rosa. I'm glad you're enjoying this. So we want a nice mintered corner. So we sew all the way, you get up to the edge, and you stop about a 1/4 inch away from the edge. Some people, I just stop and then I backstitch and secure it there. Some people like to go to a 1/4 inch and then they basically sew off to the edge. So they would sew a little diagonal right here with theirs. So what I like to do is, so I'm sewing this, I get a 1/4 inch. You can either keep the thread attached or you can snip it off. But make sure you secure that because you don't want that getting loose after washes and washes. So we got this straight, okay? And what we're going to do now is we want it to be cornered around here. So what you do, what I usually do is, okay, so you go like this and you fold it up. So this is perpendicular, is that the correct word? With the edge of your quilt, okay? So we want this to line up, like continue on with our quilt. And then we're going to since it's lining up with our quilt, when you fold it down, it's going to line up with your quilt. See? So you're going to have that little flappy. So basically, when you start sewing right here, you want to start sewing where that flappy is. So a 1/4 inch basically from the top. So you got this nice corner. See? You start sewing, backstitch, and then go down. Okay? And then we're going to sew all the way to the end. Does that make sense, the corner? Does anybody have questions about the minter corner? Basically, stop a 1/4 inch, bring it up, so it's nice and straight with your quilt, then fold it down, start sewing a 1/4 inch down, okay? So then we're sewing. We do all 4 corners, and then we get to the end of our quilt. Oh, we're getting to the end, yay, yay. So I went with scrappy sashing on this one just because this quilt, I was kind of going for a more scrappy vibe. And so let's say this is the end of our, it's going to be more, but so you'll get it close and then you're going to want to cut it off. Like I would overlap at least maybe an inch. So you found your end, your beginning part. Oh, my beginning part. So I'm going to cut it off. Boom, I cut it off. So now you're going to take this, these both are sewed up, and then when you get close, you're going to want to tuck that in and then fold that over. And then tuck that in and fold it over and then stitch that down. And with this, I like to hand sew that shut. I don't know if that's necessary, but I like to hand sew that shut. And then when it's done, you can flip it around to start the hand sewing or the machine sewing. So I know when people are machine sewing their binding on, they will typically sew the binding onto the back of the quilt instead of the front. And then you could use, when you're sewing it onto the front, you could use decorative stitch on here, or you go on the back and you line it up with the edge right here and it'll stitch right through. Or if you're going to do that way, you probably will want to do front to back as well. But some people flip it around and do like a decorative stitch, like a blanket stitch or something like that. Yeah, so basically right here's a raw edge, right? And then you're going to wrap this around your raw edge. So you don't have a raw edge. And right here is not a raw edge. But you're going to stick this raw edge inside so we don't have a raw edge. Get that? And then I will just, see that's not raw because I folded it. I will hand stitch that once it's all quilted down, or sewn down. I shared a link in the group earlier, I think yesterday or the day before, a binding technique that I really like. Susie Quilts has an actual YouTube video that she likes. You can fold the starting edge in a point, and then you just slide the ending raw edge in without having to hand sew. Oh, that's a good idea. Do it as an edge instead of a square. Susie Quilts does it a little differently. She will start it, I think it was like 8 or 10 inches. You leave this hanging, right? And then this one you want to have 8, 10 inches hanging. So you got 2 hanging. And then you'll lay them flat. Let's see if I can do this. You guys need to watch her video. It's really good. And you match it up like this. Make creases. And then she actually has you open them up. Like this. I recommend you watching her video. I'll put her link to the video in the description. How about? Because it's really good. And I like it. Because it's a lot less bulk. And then she takes these two, match up those lines that you just created, put a pin through it, and then she sews diagonally. So it's like a diagonal, and you trim off the ends, and it folds in like perfectly, and it doesn't even, you can't even tell which one was your starting, like seam. It looks like just all these other, ones. So you can't even tell which one was your starting seam. I'll put her link in the description because I really like that method. I just went with the easiest to explain and the easiest to do because the first couple times I did her method, I was like, I had to rewatch it and I'm like, okay, I did it the wrong way. I needed to position my fabric the other way because I was sewing it the wrong way. Sorry, Kathy. Have a good night. I think I'm almost done. So if you want to rewatch the ending, you can later. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining the challenge. You know, I want to thank everyone for joining the challenge. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm really happy that you all joined. It's been a lot of fun. And I can't believe it's already over. It's been like going by so fast. If you guys have any questions about the binding, let me know. I guess so once you get your binding on, there are different ways to sew it on. Either, you can do it by hand or by machine. Can you show the corners again where I messed up? Oh, so like the minter corner? Okay, I'll show that one more time. So you get to your corner. You stop a 1/4 inch from it. So basically, when I get up to there, I basically stop from my needle's here, and see my needle will be like here, and that's about a 1/4 inch. So I stop when this gets to my edge of my fabric. Does that make sense? And then I take this fabric, you fold it up like this, so it is level, like even with the quilt top. Then you fold it down like this, and then you start sewing a 1/4 inch from this top. So right about there. Does that make sense, Rebecca? And then you start sewing the rest of the way. And then, so you got this little flappy, you start sewing here, you stop, back stitch here, start sewing here. Thank you, Connie, for joining. I know it's really late for everyone. I'm sorry. I was just trying to get this information out as fast as I can. It's just so much information. So once you got it done, this is what it's going to look like, okay? On the back, both those points meet up. On the front, You can see if I can get it to do it. The front is going to look like this. So it's a nice pretty corner. And then when you go to sew it, I fold one in, so it's a nice pretty point, see? Because you want a pretty point on the front and you want a pretty point on the back. Does that make sense? Okay, you're folding the wrong way. Okay, so thank you. I'm so happy that helped you, Rebecca. Thank you for asking questions. Thanks. Do you do much for the challenge? Oh, that's fun, Tina. So you guys are making another one together. The full length pattern will be available on Thursday in the blog, and it'll also be on my Craftsy page. So if people have Craftsy accounts and want to, because you can get the account patterns on Craftsy and it saves it in your Craftsy account. If you want to do it that way too, I'm going to load that into my Craftsy on Thursday. So people can have it free on Craftsy. Free! Okay, so you have this binding on. It's all the way sewn on. If you want to hand quilt it on, I pinned it on to show you guys. Now I just have to find it. Okay, so what I do is I just take about 4 pins, wrap it around, and pin it down. Some people use different things. Some people don't even secure their binding at all, and they just hand stitch it on. A lot of people will use a whip stitch. I use, I think, what's called a ladder stitch. Oh, you lost the blocks or you lost the patterns? Sorry, Rebecca. Hopefully you can find those. You lost the patterns. You can always download them again or print them again. Anyways, so you got your. I usually do 4, and then once I get close to it, I pull this one out and put it down, and then go around. Some people like to put down the binding all the way around their quilt before they start sewing it. Some people. Where is it? You can actually buy, they look like hair clips. This is a hair clip. You can buy ones at Joann Fabrics, and they're called binding clips. And you can use these to secure your binding. Boom. So it lays flat. You can also get what's called wonder clips. I just, had to buy these for the challenge, so I have never had them before, and I just had to buy them because, I figured you guys wanted to see them. So you can use these also to clip down your binding. But if you don't want to go buy anything special, if you got hair clips, you can use hair clips. You can use pins. It's just basically you want to take some of the backing fabric, some of your binding, some of your backing fabric, some of your binding, go all the way around. Like I said, you could Google whip stitch. You like the wonder clips, Dana? I know I've been wanting to buy them, and this kind of gave me an excuse to buy them because I needed to show them on the video. They're really not that expensive either. You can get them with the coupon. I got mine at Joann Fabrics, so if you have a coupon, you can buy them with the coupon. So basically a whip stitch, or I like to use a ladder stitch because then you don't really see my thread at all. So when I did the ladder stitch, you can't see my thread at all. I think I used navy for this one. Typically, you'd want to go with, say this. I'd want to get a red. I could use white because there's little dots of white, and you really want to be able to see it that much, but you want to go with what color your binding is. So this binding's mostly navy. I went with a navy thread. This one is so multicolored. I might just go with white just because it's so multicolored. There's a lot of white in it. Ooh, Mary, they're cheaper on Amazon? Cool. If I like the wonder clips, maybe I'll buy more. I typically use the pins. I was using these too. Because I just grab it out of my hair and just use them. But I thought, ooh, cool. I usually only use 4 pins, so I think this is probably plenty of wonder clips for me. I'll probably just use about 4 and then move them along down the way when I go to the next one. Oh, regular clothespins. Rosa says she used regular clothespins. Whatever's going to keep it down. And then I've also seen some people don't use anything at all. I like something just there, just so that I can make it look nice and even. I like my binding to be even on both sides. And if I don't pin it down, sometimes it looks a little wonky. Ooh, Rebecca said she got some on eBay for way cheaper. That's cool. Yeah. Oh, so Sharon says she doesn't use anything. I know I've seen, like, Susie Quilts. I really like her. She doesn't use anything either. She just uses her finger. I just kind of like mine to be flat. I'm just not as good as eyeballing it to keep it straight, so I use pins. So, yeah, once you get that down, you know, you get your nice little, sharp little needle. I take about this much thread. Some people use thread conditioner, which is kind of like a little bit of wax, so that your thread doesn't knot up easily when you're doing it. And you make a little knot on the end. I like to place my knot back here. You know, boom. And then I just take a little bit of, maybe I can show you guys, a little bit of my backing, and then I kind of just go in. See, a little bit of my backing, a little bit of my front. And then I pull it through. A little bit of my backing, a little bit of my front, and pull it through. I try not to get it too high on the front because I don't want to see my thread at all. See? You can YouTube whip stitch or quilting, sewing on binding. You know, find which way is best for you. I would recommend getting a thimble. So I've gone, years without a thimble. I bought a plastic one. I didn't like it. So a lot of times I would use, what's it called? Like Band-Aids, my kids' Band-Aids. I just put a Band-Aid on there because you're, like, see, I didn't use a thimble. And can you see my finger? My hands are really dry, sorry. But it has an indent from just that one time. So I bought this leather thimble at, Joann Fabrics. It has this metal, but I seem to, my thread seems to break when I use the metal part when I'm sewing. So I ended up just flipping it around and just using this leather part to push my needle in. And it works pretty good. The leather fits on my finger a lot more comfortably than the plastic. I think this is Clover. Yeah, it's Clover brand. If they had, I'm sure they have one without this. I think they even have one that kind of goes around your finger. I recommend leather. Some people like plastic, some people like metal. But I really like this one. I got this one at Joann Fabrics. I just flip it around because that just kept seeming to shred my thread. I'd like be sewing, and then all of a sudden my thread would break up at the needle. And I'm like, is that metal pushing on the thread and making it break? Has that happened to people? So yeah, use a thimble or your fingers will hate you. They might even start bleeding. So thimbles. Guess, is there any more questions? I think I've gone over everything. I can't wait to see everyone's quilts. Yes, the group is staying open. Yes, they hope to have more challenges. I'm not going to be the lead designer. Somebody else will be. So, if you like my patterns and you guys want to keep seeing what I'm working on, you can follow me on my Facebook page or like my Facebook page or my Instagram page. My Facebook page is the Shop Happy Cloud Creations, which is facebook.com, Shop Happy Cloud Creations. I'll put the link up in the description. And then my Instagram is instagram.com/Happy Cloud Creations. I have some new patterns in the works, and one that's almost ready to be tested. So once it's ready to be tested, I will ask for testers on my Facebook page and my Instagram page, asking people, hey, do you want to test this for me? Free pattern, hey? So yeah, go follow me. What size needle do I use? So this one, I don't know what size it is. It just says 20. I've had this for like since I lived at home, I think. So I've had these needles like a long time. Probably like, I don't even know how long. Could be 15 years maybe. Just quilting needles. Some people use embroidery needles. I think it says 510 on there. It's just a nice size. Has a nice size loop for my thread to go through. Yeah, this is just drizzle quilting. If you go to the Quilting Notion section, it will have quilting needles, and you know, use one of those. There's all sorts of quilting notions that you could get. Yeah. Trying to think of if there's anything else you guys need. Thimbles and markers and foots and all the fun things, right? Yeah. So I guess we should probably call it a night. All of you guys are up way past your bedtime. I got up at 4:50 this morning because my husband was going to work and I was helping him make his lunch, and then I was like, I'm going to be up late tonight. I think I'm going to go back to bed instead of staying up. So I went back to bed. So I'm not too tired yet. But I think I'll have to wake up at like 5 tomorrow. So yeah, if you guys don't have any more questions, thank you all for joining. I'm so happy. This is my last video, so I just want to tell you all thank you. Thank you for making this such a fun experience, and thank you for joining. I love seeing all of your quilts. It's really cool for me as a quilt designer, especially a beginner quilt designer, to see this many people making one of my quilts. I've made 4 other quilt patterns before this, and you know, not this many people have made those ones. So it's really cool to see all of you guys making it and making it your own, and you know, changing up your sashing, and you know, using all the beautiful fabrics, and you know, it's really encouraging for me to see all the new timers in this group and all the experienced ones helping them, and you guys just a really great community of quilters. I'm really proud to be part of this group. My phone's dying. So thank you all so very much, and thank you National Quilters Circle for getting this huge group together. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have been able to get all these people on my own to do a quilt along. They've done so much work on the blog and monitoring this group, you know. I really thank them for getting people worldwide. People worldwide are, you know, working together, and it's really cool. I'm really happy that you all joined, and it's kind of sad for it to be over, but you know, it's sparked the quilting bug in people, and that's really cool. I love seeing people create new things, and you know, thank you everyone. So I guess I'm gonna say goodnight. If nobody else has questions, good night. See you around. Bye bye.